Hi everyone, it's Miss Brenner. Today I'm going to be going over some notes that relate to our horror unit about what makes a monster. Now, I know that you guys have probably seen at least one scary movie in your lifetime, and therefore you have an idea as far as what a monster may look like or how they act. And so, what I'd like you to do in the Ed puzzle is tell me what comes to mind when you think of a monster and what makes a specific monster horrifying or scary. So, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time and it'll be a short answer. Just tell me what you think makes a monster. Alrighty. So, Google defines a monster, as many would say, as an imaginary creature that is typically large, ugly, and frightening. Kids oftentimes will say that they feel that there's something hiding in their closet or underneath their bed, and if they had to describe it, it would probably be along those lines. But as we grow older, we realize that monsters are a lot more than that. They can be any kind of person, place, or thing that gives somebody that context of fear. And a lot of times they are appearing more real than they are, big and scary with horns. So there are three different categories of monsters that come to mind when talking about scary movies or horror stories. Firstly is the abstract monster, then the human morality monster, and the deadly sins monsters. So we're going to start off with the abstract monster. So this is when the reader has to try and fill in the details of the fear themselves. The author creates a monster, but it's, just like it sounds, abstract, unknown, and therefore our mind is left to kind of create this fear. The abstract monster is shaped by the reader's deepest fears or their id. If you've taken psychology, you know that the id is the only component of a personality that is present from birth. So these are your aspects of personality that are entirely unconscious and includes the instinctive and primitive behaviors that you would usually have, like your need to feed or your need to sleep. Those are primitive behaviors that your body will automatically do. And so this monster feeds on these needs. Different key traits of an abstract monster. They revolve around the story setting and characters' weaknesses. They promise consequences or violence, but they don't usually show it, or at least not right up front in a way that you directly see it happen. It gives a glimpse of the unknown without defining it. Stephen King uses these kinds of scary monsters quite often, along with other large name horror directors or authors. These monsters are some of the more easy to create because you're leaving your audience to fill in the blanks. So some examples of abstract monsters are The Mist by Stephen King, or Amnesia, if you've ever played these video game series, where you wake up not knowing anything, and therefore you have to fill in the blanks yourself of a really horrifying environment. The next form of monster is the human morality monster. This monster represents or brings out the worst in people. This means the fear does not always come from the monster itself, but instead the terrifying behavior that change in humans brought out by the monster. So, different key traits of morality monsters. It revolves around how characters react to the monster and the threat of the monster, not actually the monster's physical existence. It shows how fragile society can be when it breaks down. The monster often represents the darkness within the protagonist. So oftentimes when I think of these monsters, I think of zombies. So some of my examples are 28 Days Later, where honestly, the protagonist and the other main characters are sometimes scarier than the actual zombies themselves because of the way that they treat each other and the things they're willing to do simply to survive. If you've read Lord of the Flies, this is another great example where the environment itself is the monster, but the characters truly become more of a threat to each other than the environment ever was. If you've played Man of Arms and seen Pyramid Head, this is another great example of a morality monster where our protagonist shows some characteristics that are certainly more threatening than the monster. I just finished this book, Dry. Great book. It's by Neil Shusterman and Jared Shusterman, and I highly recommend. But this is another example where the monster isn't exactly front and forward, because the monster itself is how humans treat each other when water is no longer available. Really scary. If you like really kind of frightening books, this is a good one. Our last form of monster is the Deadly Sins monster. This monster represents our greatest sins as a society to serve as a warning. This means that it's not the monster, so the monster itself usually is portrayed with an inhuman mask. It's not the monster that we fear, but the monster's behaviors which mimic the darkest aspects of humanity that we would rather deny. So, some key traits. It plays on, obviously, the deadly sins, which is pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, and sloth. But it's created to force the reader to deeply contemplate the pitfalls of humanity. Often has an inhuman mask, as I stated before, is a reflection of the worst parts of ourselves, and that threat can change over time. So, Deadly Sins monsters are the most iconic of the monsters. They're going to be like Dracula and Frankenstein. Dracula, which represents greed and lust, because they're going to try and take everything away from people for their own benefit. And Frankenstein, which is pride and this anger. So these monsters are extremely iconic, but have almost become comedic elements because nobody's really scared of them anymore. Or they've become elements of romantic novels. But just because these monsters are no longer feared doesn't mean that iconic monsters like this don't exist. Deadly Sins monsters simply changed form so that way they still frighten their audience. Today they've become things like Siren Head and have just really changed their shape so that way people are afraid based on their own need of power and willingness to give up their humanity in order to align with monsters like these. That's the warning that they present now. Alrighty. So now that we've gone over the different kinds of monsters, for Activity 6, what I'd like you guys to do is this monster research. So you're going to pick your own monster. Maybe it's one that I've never heard of before. Maybe it's one that's more common. Maybe vampires, maybe zombies. Whatever monster you have a personal interest in. I'd like you to do a little bit of research about that monster. Tell me what causes it. Tell me about its strengths and weaknesses. Give me a description. Tell me if it can be cured or eradicated. Give me some interesting facts or things that you know. Maybe if it's a monster that's more iconic, like Siren Head or Slender Man, tell me who created it. And then what I'd also like you to do is tell me what type of monster it is. It can be any of the 3 different categories that we discussed. This is for you to do your research. Now, my example is werewolves. I did some research and I came up with what exactly are werewolves, what causes them, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how you can cure them, how you can kill them, and then some interesting facts. I also talked a little bit about the fact that it's a Deadly Sins monster and what connections they have, like what warnings they're giving, such as warnings against anger and extreme rage, which would be a deadly sin. They also, during a time period where rabies ran across the land and caused havoc, this was meant to try and keep people indoors and away from stray animals. This kind of monster that was caused by being bit by stray animals. So, that is my example and my notes. I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.